Hello. Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight for a presentation about raptors. Lowell's invited me to present, and I'm always glad to be able to share with everybody. So tonight we're going to talk about some of the potential raptors you might see around this winter time, and let me just start off with just a couple some general things first here. All right. Well, I did want to start first with some credits. Uh, Most of these photographs are mine within the presentation, but Robert Shantz is another friend from Arizona who has quite a few photographs that are available. Um, I am going to be using some of the graphics provided by eBird here, especially for their abundance charts. And then otherwise, this is just a presentation I put together for this evening. So, all right. Well, just to kind of give you an overview of what some of the objectives are tonight. One thing I wanted to point out, though, because I realize everybody's kind of limited on being able to raise your hand and ask questions. It's muted, and that's one of the things I don't always enjoy about Zoom presentations. They're a little more restricted that way. However, I know there's a Q&A at the end of the evening, and so what I've done is put a slide number up in the corner for uh, for each of the slides. And so you can reference that if you have a question from a specific slide. That's why I put that in there for these sorts of meetings. All right, moving on to the presentation then. So tonight we'll be talking again about raptors that you can see here. And this is a quick consolidation from eBird of the various raptors we have out there. Of course, now our falcons are um, not necessarily in the same area of the list, but I kind of played around with it, put it in the same place. And we're really going to be working with our fall raptors, but this is quite a list of species. And so just because of, for the sake of time and trying to present a reasonable amount of information about the individual species, I won't be going over everything on this list, but we should have a nice overview here. And within this, we're going to focus on identification and a little bit about habitat and behaviors, and then just characteristics, just the idea of looking at the shapes of raptors. And that kind of leads me into my next slide, which kind of gives just a small presentation, just 4 books here of raptor field guides. If you start looking for field guides about raptors out there, there's a plethora. And of course, raptors are a very fun topic, and a lot of people enjoy observing them. In fact, this is probably the raptors are, one of the top 3 watchable wildlife groups of animals out there. Large mammals, of course, are right up there, and raptors are right up there with them. So, but these 3 or 4 guides I'm presenting here, what I wanted to kind of highlight is the idea of, again, back to Jiz here. This Hawkwatch guide, which was back for Cape May, and Dunn, Sibley, and Sutton all contributed to creating that guide. Over time, it's evolved to the most current version, Hawks in Flight. And if you were just kind of getting into raptors, or maybe you wanted to study them a little more depth, all of those books, plus the other ones out there, are all really good. But this is a good one for identification. And one of the things I think is very useful for it is just, this is inside the front cover, for example. It's the whole idea of shape and structure. And this is very, very helpful, not just with not just with flying raptors, but also perched raptors. And this skill of starting to look at raptors and being able to differentiate between the falcons, perhaps the individual species of falcons, but especially between falcons and, let's say, bootios versus like the genus Circus with the harriers versus kites. Just recognize the differences in between the genera by how their overall physiology has shaped them to suit their environment and how they interact with their environment. This is just really a wonderful introduction to the idea of looking at birds and their shape and structure. And this is just a real quick example of real life. These are actually from a group of migrating Swainson's hawks and turkey vultures kind of mixed in together. And of course, there's the the obvious size discrepancy, but there are finer details with these shapes here, the breadth of the wing and the slotting on the tips of the wings as well, the relative lengths of the head and that versus the tail and the size and shape of the head. This is the whole idea behind um, what that guide has, as well as just what I'm going to be presenting tonight. So, and then just tied in with this, I did want to just mention, kind of close by in your neck of the woods, the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. This is a great way to just go and watch lots of raptors come through, especially during migration season. But it also turns out the website has a lot of resources too for species that you can see here. This is on the website, which talks about the raptors you can see there. And then, for example, Cooper's Hawk, it goes through some details about them, the number of individuals. It's kind of amazing that average annual sightings over nearly 2,500 species. I'm sorry, nearly 2,500 individuals of Cooper's Hawks, for example, seen up there at the Golden Gate Bridge area there. So this is a fun opportunity. But of course, Fresno County, your own backyard, there's areas where you can just travel to see, raptors as well. And Robert was mentioning how he went out and saw over 100 individual raptors just over the weekend. So again, watching raptors is just an incredibly fun thing to do. I did mention eBird, and eBird, of course, is a place where you can keep track of the species you see and so forth. But even if you're not a person who enjoys putting all that data into the computer, you can still take advantage of the resources they have. And one of these is their abundance maps. And this is fantastic. It's a fantastic presentation of the data that's been gathered over, the multiple years now that's been running, and gives you appreciation for what your data is doing. And so I'm going to take advantage of these abundance maps to kind of give you a little appreciation of where you might see some of these raptors within Fresno County. So let's just jump right from there into our first raptors for the evening, which is going to be in the genus Falco, which is within Falconiformes. And falcons, are raptors. We still consider them raptors, but they were separated from our other, you could say, traditional raptors, hawks and eagles and kites and so forth, because it was realized that the falcons are actually more closely related to our passerines and parrots of all things. So pretty interesting here. But here, this is one of the abundance maps I'm mentioning here. I'm going to try and show this for the various species we're going to talk about this evening. And this is the American Kestrel. Of course, here you recognize the shape of Fresno County. And if you go to the website and look at the individual species, you can select the time of year. And so here I'm really highlighting now from November on through February, our wintering populations of all these individuals. So, and if you look here, of course, the American Kestrels is quite abundant. The darker the blue means there's more individuals observed in these areas. And then, of course, the paler blue means there's fewer individuals. So there's a pretty good abundance, especially out in the open, flat areas. Of course, you get up into the montane habitat, and we don't expect to see them up there. So kind of gives you a feel for where you can spot them and where they're abundant. Kind of a noteworthy little fact here, of course, when you get to more urban habitat, they're just not that common. So. All right, well, let's move into the American Kestrel. American Kestrel is a fun little falcon. It is, really our smallest raptor, although truly the Sharp-shinned gives them a run for the money. But anyhow, if you look at the falcons, one thing that among them being the smallest raptor, that's one of their unique traits, and at least here in North America. And then also one of the other traits that's atypical is the differentiation between the genders. The individual on the left is a male and it's a female on the right. So we have spotting, pale breast, and then we have streaking on the female. And that's generally not the case. You can't tell apart males and females because they share similar patterns. You can tell them apart by size and weight, but generally not by plumage patterns. Now, kestrels are are pretty among our falcons. They're pretty conspicuous with their striping there, the malar stripes and whatnot. It's really a, a nice characteristic for our falcons. And another unique characteristic for our kestrels here is that they're, being one of our smallest birds out there, they are subject to being preyed on. And so they have these what are called ocelli. These are false eyes on the back of their head there. And this apparently works because they've evolved to have this appearance like they're looking at you, even though they're staring the other way. It gives another raptor a pause before they just jump out at them. Now, falcons. One of our characteristics for falcons is their very long pointed wings. And even when they're perched, you can really get a really nice appreciation for that. Look how long these wings are. You can see the individual primaries stepping down on the wingtips there. And this is what makes falcons fast flyers, those really long, narrow pointed wings. But they also have quite long tails. So even with those long wings, those tails, in this case of the kestrel, still extend past the wingtips of their birds as well. But they need these tails. The tails are the rudders. They're flying fast, and that helps them with maneuvering. Another thing, I just side note here. Of course, this is a desert photo, but being our smallest raptor, they're also cavity nesters. That's not the case for most of our raptors either. But if you're small, you got to make sure you just don't get eaten, or your young do either. So that's one of their interesting characteristics. So here they are in flight. And again, the male's on the right and the female's on the left. And they're more plainer breasted with a little bit of spotting. The males sometimes show this nice, it depends on the lighting. You can see the little white spots on the tips of the wings there. But if you look at this overall, these long pointed wings, very characteristic shape for our falcons here. And then the female's just plainer on top. And she's actually carrying an insect that she's caught there. They're very much generalist in what they eat. Now, another small falcon that we have is our Merlin. And if you look at them, they're not that abundant, but you can't expect to see them when you go out into the flats and the open areas. Now, Merlins are very voracious predators on other birds. So that's generally who they're going after when they're out there hunting, whereas the kestrel's more of a generalist. And one thing about here's one of our Merlins consuming a bird now. And within within the Merlins, these guys overall, same sort of shape as our kestrel. Really long wings, if you notice how long these wings are here, and a long tail, but not coming to the tip of the tail. That's a similar shape that they share. But you might get the impression this is a bulkier, heavier bird. And they are overall. They are sexually dimorphic, again, just like the males and females of the kestrels. This is a male on the left, a female on the right there. Again, nice long wingtips. But other than that, they are noticeably different because in flight, they're just heavier overall. They have a lot of breast muscle. And so unlike the American kestrel, when they're flying, they're like a bullet and they stick on straight on their target. Whereas kestrels, it's not unusual, of course, to see them doing wind hovering. They'll stay stationary over one spot and kind of hover in the air and watch down at the ground looking for perhaps a mouse or insect prey that they might be going after. That's not the case for our Merlins. Merlins are long winged again, fast flyers, but because they're overall heavier than a kestrel, they just can't hover. And so they instead just use their speed to go and try and catch again the other flying prey, the birds. So you have to be fast to catch our birds, of course. So, all right, well, let's move into a couple of our larger falcons here, both the peregrine falcon, and you can see then there's some, and the prairie falcon. So if you look at the overall expected range for the wintering range of our peregrines, they're a little more urban in a sense versus the prairie falcon. We look at the prairie, we get a little more habitat that's they're both open habitat in general, but we're getting a little closer to the hills and wooded areas and not quite so, let's say, not quite so urban in the sense, less impact from man-made activity in that sense. But both of these are really found in the open areas. So the prairie and the peregrine are also in the genus Falco, but they're overall kind of two different. They'll fly, they'll go after birds and whatnot, but they're really quite different as far as their overall physiology. The prairie falcon here on the left is smaller than the peregrine. It doesn't weigh as much, and they can be found in the same habitat, and even nesting sometimes in the same habitat. But in general, the peregrine is the dominant bird. And the peregrine, of course, just an amazing bird to read about. There's lots of good books you can read just about the peregrines. But if you look at them overall in size and shape, one of the characteristics here is if you look at those wingtips on a prairie falcon for a perched bird, it's much more like what you see with the Merlin and the Kestrel. Doesn't go all the way down to the tips, whereas the tip of the tail. Whereas with the peregrine wingtips very long, all the way down to the tip of the tail. This is just again, one of our strongest flyers overall. And if you're to see them in flight, they're the peregrine on our left here versus the prairie on the right. Both of these are quite fast flying individuals, of course. However, the peregrine just is a little bit faster. It's a bigger bodied bird. When you can, and it's a bigger bodied bird. And one of the things we talk about is with the wingtips. When the wingtips in flight, they tend to have a very fluid motion to them, and almost whip-like. Whereas the prairie falcon tends to be a little shallower in its wing beats, a little bit stiffer overall. That's one characteristic that can help you seeing them in flight. With identifying them in flight. And another characteristic, of course, the prairie falcons tend to be a little bit paler, and they have these, what we call the dark axillars, which is basically the armpit of the birds. They kind of come out a little triangular shape in there. And this, even at a distance, can be a really useful characteristic for identifying a prairie falcon when they're flying away from you. So, all right, that's falcons. But we're going to switch over now to a different order.
Hi.
And different family of birds.
Come up.
There we go. All right. Now this is like a fun individual here. Some of you may recognize it right off the bat. Look at those really long wingtips there, and a pretty long tail, but relatively speaking, not heavily marked. And we've got a lot of speckling and mottling overall here. And this is where we run into some of our challenges. We're actually looking right now at the genus Buteo. And this is a red-tailed hawk, but it's an immature taking a bath here in a creek. And Buteos are a fun genus overall, and they can present some challenges. One of the challenges we get with our Buteos is that they're fair-sized birds, so most of these individuals take at least 1 to 2 years to reach an adult plumage. And while they're in their immature plumage, their patterning can be kind of tricky and challenging between the different species. So one of the first things you want to do is recognize as being a Buteo. And our Buteos are long-winged, nice long wings, but they're broad wings. Okay, their tails are long, but not that long, relatively speaking. And they're just slower flyers. If you see them in flight, their wing beats they can be deep, but they're slower. Nothing quite the same as what we might see with the falcons. So right off the bat, they stand out. Just in their overall shape and how they're flying, they're entirely different from the falcons we've been looking at. But now, when we're getting to Buteos, one of the things you're going to want to try and tell right off the bat before trying to figure out what species is whether you're dealing with an adult or an immature. And one of the characteristics that Bill Clark, I believe, was the first person to sort of figure out early on was the fact that immatures have Buteos. This is true for Buteo species and Buteoine species. They have pale primaries. And because of these pale primaries, allows the sunlight to shine through, and it's very visible on the upper part of the wing. This is a great characteristic in flight to help tell your immatures. And again, this is across the board with all Bootios. So Swainson's hawk, Ferruginous hawk, rough-legged, all of them. So this is a really useful characteristic. But another characteristic that they share, the immatures, that can make it a little more challenging sometimes just by the overall shape is that I call them training feathers. They have longer wings overall and longer tails. And if you look here, this is an immature red-tailed hawk on the left, and on the right, this is an adult. And I've tried to scale them as close as possible to each other, find a similar flight posture and all. And if you notice, look conspicuously longer the tail is versus an adult, and the overall primaries and flight feathers are slightly longer too, and it really stands out. This is a immature perched, and again, the tail's really long. The wing feathers are really long as well, but they're not reaching the tip of the tail because the tail's noticeably longer, and this is one of the first things that you want to try and do to get to your Bootios. So just a quick sort of introduction into them. All right, now let's just jump into red tails, because really what that was, that first part there is really just an introduction to immature Bootios. But here now, just talking about the red-tailed hawks at their abundance maps. Wow, look at that density of blue. And of course, you can still see them up in the mountainous areas. These guys are generalists. Out of all of our raptors, the red-tailed hawk is probably the raptor that you have the greatest probability of seeing on any day at any location. And they are very much generalists in terms of habitat and as well as in the food that they can consume. So it's a fun bird to try and figure out, and a great bird to practice your identification with. All right, well, just a quick introduction, a little bit to the life history in a real abbreviated form of this is a red-tailed hawk here. And again, if you notice, these wings very long, but they're also broad. You can just see that here with how long the secondaries are and all. The tail is relatively shorter here, and a lot of times, you know, the red-tailed hawks are going to be perch hunting, because they're a bigger, heavier bird, and they're not going to want to be flying around so often trying to hunt unless they have good airflow. It's easier for them to do this. And then when they spot some prey, they'll dive in, and then if they catch whatever it is, a small rodent or whatever, they'll take it someplace and consume it. And here's a red-tailed hawk that's caught I think like a wood rat out here in alfalfa fields. And one of the behaviors you'll see it doing right now is it's mantling. It's spreading its wings, covering the prey. And this is an interesting behavior that you can observe with raptors. A Cooper's hawk, if you've watched them at a feeder or maybe a park, if they've caught, let's say, a house sparrow or even a pigeon or some other bird, it will also mantle its prey. And when it's doing that, typically it's doing it to kind of conceal it, but also to dim the lights, so to speak, because one of the things with the process of capturing prey, they're not necessarily immediately killed. Hawks and raptors overall, the word hawk kind of comes from the word, an Anglo-Saxon word that refers to the feet and the talons. And these are the weapons, you could say, that they're using to both capture but also kill the prey. And it's not necessarily instantaneous. So mantling while they're in the process of the prey being killed helps keep it from escaping. And in this case here, if you see the raven up on the left, helps it from being readily observed or maybe even being stolen. I don't know if you have been out someplace sometime and very possible watched a bald eagle take away somebody else's food that they worked so hard to capture and kill. And this is one reason the red tails will mantle, because bald eagles be out in the field sometimes too and just take advantage of this opportunity for a free meal. So without the work and exertion. Another interesting characteristic you see here, this is a red-tailed hawk that was perched on a telephone pole, and it was a windy day, and sometimes the dust will blow. And if you noticed here, the third eyelid, the nictating membrane, And this is something, of course, that's not just found with our raptors, it's found with all the birds and into other reptiles, of course. I'm not as familiar with how it is with mammals, but I believe that we have one. It's just not functional. It's one of those old evolutionary characteristics. But this is really handy in this case for the wind, but it also serves for for some protection of the eyes when they're capturing their prey as well. You'll notice that if you get to ever watch them in the process, they'll they'll close that eyelid because if you get your eye scratched, it could mean the difference between life or death out there in the world as we know it. All right. Well, let's look at our red-tailed hawks. One thing about our red-tailed hawks is, boy, they have a tremendous number of morphs out there. We can have dark morphs, rufous morphs, light morphs, and realize that morphs are different from subspecies. Typically, we expect to see westerns, and the westerns generally have more of a belly band. You can see it here, and two of the common ones we see in there, of course, is a rufous morph, and there can be whole ranges in those plumages there. The rufous morph redtail is just one of my favorites, just a gorgeous bird overall. But this is what I call a classic perched redtail or classic perched buteo. They've got a pretty long tail, but the wingtips can come close to the tail or near the tip if you see it from the back side, or in this case, you manage to see it from the front side, but not as long as you expect to see the falcon, which would be much longer. Their shape, because of their larger size, they tend to have more of a shoulder pad, you could say here. They're a little bit broader across the top here, and of course a large head, and that's a good characteristic shape for a perched buteo. And then one of the things that we're gonna the back view we had earlier, I forgot to mention the scapular V. If you look at the backside, you often see white modeling on the scapulars, which can kind of give a V shape to it. And I can go back really fast and point it out. You can see a little bit of it here, and then on the immature, you can see a little bit of it here too as well. That's one of those ID at 55 characteristic, 55 miles an hour, that is. When you're driving down the highway, say, oh, there's a red-tailed hawk. So, and red-tailed hawks in flight. Again, this is the classic red-tail. Look at that nice, long but broad wingspan. It's not pointy at the tip, it has slotting, which helps with soaring. Good for the aerodynamics there. And these are just some of the different morphs. This is more of a rufous morph. This is a western with not quite as much rufous coming in there. Of course, we can have whole ranges across the spectrum of morphs, all the way into these dark morphs. And then, of course, you get into the Harlan subspecies that we're not talking about. And this is actually an albino and the red tail here. But the key takeaway here is that, red tails can be a lot of fun. You can see a lot of variation out there, which makes them challenging. Remember that you have immatures as well, with varying degrees of speckling and markings and so forth, depending on their morph as well. But the big thing is just the shape. This is a classic buteo shape, classic red tail shape, one to recognize all the time. Long, broad wings with the slotting when they're open. And when they're closed, those wingtips fall pretty close to the tip of the tail. Not really longer than the tip of the tail. When you get to those that are longer than the tip of the tail, you start getting into the longer winged species, Ferruginous hawk and rough-legged. We're going to talk about the Ferruginous hawk here. What an elegant bird. What a fun bird to see. And don't have that many overall. If you look at the abundance, before we step to the abundance, I want to just point out here, if you look at the Ferruginous hawk, they have one of the largest gapes of our buteos. That's the gape there, how wide it can open its mouth. Look how far it comes back near the back of the eye. That's a great identification characteristic right there if you get to see it from close or with a spotting scope. But anyhow, talking about abundance, we don't see them that often. Of course, ag fields and places like that is where we might expect to see them. Just an example here, Tranquility in Western Fresno County, with a lot of the agricultural areas are places with this wide, flat expanse. This is more characteristic of where they like to breed. And one thing that you'll see with our Ferruginous hawks is they'll spend time on the ground. Harriers will also spend time on the ground. All raptors can spend time on the ground, but probably among our buteos, I'd say the Ferruginous hawk is the one that will probably spend the most time on the ground and just sitting there, sometimes watching a hole. And they like these ground burrowing rodents, and prairie dogs is actually one of their specialties. The overall populations of uh, Ferruginous hawks are only in the 10 to 15,000, maybe up to 20,000. I don't know what the current count is, but um, but prairie dogs were one of the key species for Ferruginous hawks. And back in the days, the prairies, um, the middle state, the central states, of course, had billions of these, and of course the Ferruginous hawks populations must have been much higher at that time. But here's a fun photo taken by Donald Jones. He was, I think, it was with the Idaho or Wyoming Game and Fish, and this is Ferruginous hawk here, you know, on the nest, got nice feathered legs. We think about it, if you're hunting ground rodents, having feathered legs could be a handy thing if they try and bite at you while you're trying to catch them. But you might notice here he's actually brought in a prey item. Well, there's that prairie dog, and here's a little closer look. This is one reason why you have a wide gape. It helps you get the meal down. Think of an owl, right? We see owls copying up pellets. So raptors do as well. And, fur, some indigestible parts of the body, teeth, bones, and other things like that will be ejected because, of course, raptors and all of our birds out there, they don't have true teeth. They can't chew the prey. So they can tear things apart. But in this case, this little guy, he's just getting down a full meal, help him grow into a bigger fellow. Ferruginous hawks are just beautiful birds. Again, there's that nice wide gape, and they have a scapular V as well, but it's cinnamon in color. And versus that white we see with the red-tailed hawk, they tend to be fairly plain on the breast, but can sometimes show even a suggestion of a belly band. But there's some other characteristics that are different. Here's the feathered tarsi. You might see they're perched, really long wingtips coming down near the tip of the tail. And in flight, the adults are one species that will show the panels of light, 3 panels of light, even as adults, not just as immatures. This is an immature Ferruginous hawk. Almost seems like an albino. Very little marking on the underbelly and on the underside of the wings as compared to an adult. There's quite a bit more markings here. Next to no or no markings on the leg feathers there, whereas with the adult we have the classic sort of V shape here on the underside with those feathered tarsi. But on both of them, we still can see these windows of light because those primaries are so pale as well as the tails. And again, this is the classic adult Ferruginous hawk, but a lot more gray in the top here, whereas this bird would be much paler on the top side overall. Just an elegant, large, in Europe, they'd probably call it an eagle, and a hawk is fine too, but it's just a wonderful bird to go see. All right, going to move on to accipiters here. This is always a fun group of birds, and one of the most challenging, because we have, of course, 2 species here. These are Cooper's hawks, and then we also have Sharp-shinned hawks as well. And honestly, this is probably the most challenging of all of the raptors we have out there. And there are some things that can help you tell them apart. But one thing you'll notice here, this is a pair of Cooper's hawks, have the nice kind of square heads, but the size discrepancy, wow, it is very noticeable. Most conspicuous of all of our species of raptors. In general, with all of our raptors, the female, which is on the right here, is always larger than male. But the general size difference might be 10 to 15%. It's substantially more so with the males and females of our accipiters. One of the ideas is that as birds, predators, they consume largely avian prey, being able to coexist in the same habitat together and the same territory, be able to not compete against each other, this allows them to hunt for larger and smaller bird species so they can kind of coexist together while they're raising offspring. So that's one of the ideas behind it. But accipiters are, of course, are fun birds. Of course, maybe if you have your backyard feeder, they may not be quite as fun, but they are incredible to watch nonetheless. And this is an old slide photograph of mine that I scanned just because I just love it, because here's the classic accipiter shape. Really short wings, not that long primaries at all, but a really long tail. And of course, if you watch them, these guys are not long distance flyers. They're built for speed, but very short bursts of speed. And then after that, that's it. They're very good at pursuing and rounding, turning sharp corners and getting through narrow areas going after it. But because they're can only go a short distance, they rely upon the element of surprise. You'll see them perching, trying to hide someplace. In this case, this individual up in the upper left corner was on a power pole, and just across the road on the other side were white-crowned sparrows and other birds out there foraging around. And here he is crouching like a cat. And then down he dives. And this is not the same individual. This is one that's caught a pigeon here, rock pigeon, but then catch the prey. And in most cases, the way the accipiters kill the prey is by holding them, squeezing them tight. They might puncture an organ, but they also tend to suffocate them as well. And then after that, pluck and eat. And then, oops, oh, that jumped too fast. And then afterwards, pick your bill. All right, this is a characteristic Cooper's hawk or sharp-shinned kill site. The prey, in this case was a mourning dove, was in the middle, and they plucked it. They plucked the feathers off, and then they tear off all the meat. And so that's one way, if you're out there, you might find it. Hopefully not in your backyard, but someplace out there. It's one way to help recognize the sort of a plucking site. Sometimes they'll have a plucking station. They might be up in a post, and you'll see feathers on all sides that way too as well. So, all right, those are accipiters, and we're going to try and work on the identification of them. This is the Cooper's hawk, and then there's the sharp-shinned hawk. Bottom line is that we can see them a lot of habitat where they can be out there. Obviously, they are going to be up in some of the montane areas, although if it's snowing and whatnot, they probably will move down in elevation. But bottom line, that the Cooper's hawk is the one that's going to be more abundant versus the sharp-shinned. So probability-wise, we have a better chance of seeing a sharp-shinned on the right here versus a Cooper's hawk. Now, this is a view of them in flight. This is an adult on the left and immature on the right, the streaking on the breast versus this sort of a barred pattern that we see on a Cooper's hawk. So there are size differences. The Cooper hawk is larger and the sharp-shinned is smaller. However, of course, with the size variation between the males and females, the male Cooper's hawk starts approaching the size of the female Sharpie. So close that it's next to impossible to tell apart the field. And boy, when you get those two together, even the experts will have their disagreements on whether it's a Cooper or a Sharpie. And so you can definitely see where you have a slash with identifying those. But these are good examples here of ones that you can tell apart. In flight, Sharpies tend to push. See how they're pushing their wrists forward? As they tend to push the wrists forward so they're almost even with the front of their head. Cooper's hawks, they tend to not push them forward so much. And so when they're in flight, they have the shape what we call like a flying cross. There's the cross forward, where this is more like a capital T in the sense where you've got the long body, but imagine these push forward here, that's your line, it's just a flying T. So those are the shapes that you can see, but also we have their tail shape, rounded versus squared. And this tail is not fanned, but if it's fanned more, you get more of this rounding shape. This one tends to be more square. This characteristic is tied in. If you look here, these feathers are virtually all the same length. Actually, these outer tail feathers are longer than the central tail feathers. So when they spread them, they lose their fan shape. They don't have the fan shape. Whereas if you look here, the inner tail feathers are actually shorter than the central tail feathers. So when they open them up, not only are they fanned, it shows the fanning a little bit more. This can be a real health characteristic. And we're going to look at it more closely here on these perched individuals. This is here the Sharpie, sharp-shinned, name for look how skinny those little legs are there, those tarsi. And the front edge is almost like a knife edge there in a sense, so it's very sharp. And then the Cooper's hawk here, both of these are immatures. and larger, legs are a little bit heavier, but look at the tail feathers. When they're all folded up, they're about the same length here, whereas we get the stair-stepping effect on the Cooper's hawk. And so for close in, again, literally the outermost tail feathers of the Sharpie are longer than the central ones. So when they start getting spread, they will stay with that straight edge on them. Whereas with the Cooper's hawk, these are wet, but you can see how the inner one, I'm sorry, this is an outer tail feather here, a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, a little bit longer, and longer still. This is something that can be really helpful on perch birds, and also affects how you see them in flight, of course. Other characteristics here are, we talk about Cooper's hawks being a little more block-headed, whereas it's more round-headed on the Sharpie. This is Sharpie on the left, Cooper's hawk on the right. This isn't the best photograph, but I don't have one where its head's turned well enough. But tied in with that, the eye is a little more forward on the larger Cooper's hawk, and a little more centrally placed on the Sharp-shinned. And then a couple of characteristics. This black on the head, this dark head, goes the whole way down the nape of the neck, where it's more like a cap appearance. Dark gray, but then paler here on the nape of the neck. But the last sort of characteristic I want to point out here, again, classic accipiter, short wings, long tail, short wings, long tail. In general, accipiters, the Sharpie, to me, the wingtips come down about halfway down the tail, and generally a little less than halfway down the tail on a Cooper's hawk. So, all right, well, we're going to run out of time here. So what I've done for the last part of the presentation is just going to condense some of these other species and look at them together. We have both our golden eagle and bald eagle. And we're starting with the golden eagle, again, up towards the front edge of the mountains, and then out in the rolling hills, we have pretty decent abundance. Less abundant, of course, and more where there's water association with our bald eagle. These are two different genera. We've got sea eagles, and whereas the golden eagle, the bald eagle is a sea eagle, whereas our golden eagle is really, in a sense, a large boodio, and genetically that's more so the case. Golden eagle here, and then of course bald eagles on the right here. Now, with both of these are just large birds overall, and that really makes a difference when you're seeing them. And flight, they're just big, heavy birds, heavy in the wind. And of course, if you see an adult bald eagle, pretty distinct. But the immatures can be more challenging. These are both golden eagles, and these are both bald eagles. And this is one of the quick, I'm not going to try and go through don't have time to go through different white belly phases and so forth for our bald eagles, for example. But even golden eagles they're immature with more white in the plumage within the wing feathers and tail feathers. And this is the key thing, of course, it's white belly with our bald eagles. So that is not the case with our golden eagles. Even as they're going into adulthood, takes 4 to 5 years or so, their bellies tend to be much, much darker versus of the golden eagle versus the bald eagle. So, but another characteristic that really helps if you start seeing them, besides that, imagine it's not good lighting or whatever, how would you help tell them apart? Because they both have long, broad wings. It's the relative projection of the tail and the head versus the tail. If you look at our golden eagle's heads tend to project only half the distance, or the tails are twice as long as the head projection. Bald eagles, it's about the same length on both sides. That's just the general rule of thumb. Golden eagles, the heads projects half the length of the tails, or the tail projects twice the length. See, much longer tail relative to the head, and then shorter there. So that's the quick rule of thumb in addition to plumages. And can't forget the turkey vultures, of course, still out there in the wintertime. Not as populous as in the migration, and of course some of the counts will not be the same as you see in migration. Spectacular there. These are large birds as well, but they're of course quite distinct. They have this nice silver lining, and they're almost always dark on the underside. But if you look at their overall shape of their head, it's much pointier, and they have more like the ratio, like a golden eagle of a a shorter head versus a longer, twice the length of the tail. But the bottom line is this bird, of course, vultures are soaring birds. They're out there soaring, smelling for, you can sort of see the nostrils there. They're actually literally smelling for the scent of recently deceased animals that they can feed upon. But in order to do this, to spend that time covering the terrain during the day, they have this really nice, strong, we say strong dihedral. Their wings are folded up in a higher V. And tied in with that, they don't weigh that much. Well, they're not quite as big as eagles, but they're pretty big, but their body weight is much, much less. And so they're much lighter in the wind. They tend to bob and be rocked by the wind, whereas eagles tend to have a flatter sort of profile, less of a dihedral, and they're just much more stable in the wind. So that's a good clue for helping identify them at a distance. And then wrapping it up before the evening gets too late, going to talk about a bird that's locally abundant. Let's say, of course, Pantheon. They're in their own family as well as their own genus. Of course, our ospreys. I mean, what a that's a fun bird to finish the evening on. I think, you know, they're not necessarily that challenging to identify. In part, that gull-like wing shape, wing profile, the way they hold their wings in flight. Of course, it's perhaps unsurprising since they have those same sort of large water body association there. They're something with that wing profile that really helps versus being over land. Quite distinctive features, of course, these dark carpal patches. And one thing that's notable, one reason why they're in their own family is if you look at their head shape, it's distinctly different from what we see with hawks and raptors. And that's to do with the shape of their skull. They literally are lacking a bone here above the eye. So it gives their head more of a rounded appearance versus our bootios and eagles and so forth. But one of the last fun things about them, of course, look at those zygodactyl feet, 2 toes forward, 2 toes back. And that's handy for catching fish, right? And helps them with carrying them. In fact, the osprey are known to migrate carrying a fish. They call them ospreys packing a lunch. They carry along with them. And this is from a deceased osprey. This is in my hand here. It gives you an idea of the size of their feet and look how sharp those talons are. But even then, for those of you who have fished and held one in your hand, boy, slippery and slimy and wiggling, tough to catch. So if you look closely here, you can almost see all the their modified scales, very coarse, very sandpapery bottom to the bottom of the feet there it's just like sandpaper. So combine those two features together with those long talons and that sandpapery foot, really helps you hold a slimy fish. So, all right, well, that's going to wrap up the Raptors. I have 2 quick infomercials, let's say. Wings for Willcox Birding and Nature Festival. I'm the chairman of this festival. It's held at Willcox. We just opened up registration here. It's the Martin Luther King weekend in January. Rick Wright's going to be talking about sparrows, tied in with his book. And since sparrows is one of my things, I mentioned it. And since I'm chairman, everybody's welcome to come. It's a fun event. And then also the ABA is doing the Institute for Institute for Field Ornithology. We're also doing on sparrows, and it's nice to have this back. This will be the first time since COVID hit, and it'll be at the end of January. And this is a very comprehensive, in-depth look at sparrows. Some of you might have heard my talk in the spring about sparrows too. And this is a great, fun way to spend the week looking around for all the different species of sparrows and really learning them in depth. So, all right, well, that wraps it up. And I don't know if there's any questions in the chat room or not. We had the slides there, slide numbers, if that helps, but I'll open it up and let Rachel and Robert see if there's any questions or anything.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Homer. We do have one comment here in the chat box, and Valerie is asking if you can go over Cooper's hawk and Sharp-shinned hawks with the differences in the tails. She thinks she might have gotten it backwards in her notes. She's wondering if you could just go over that.
We'll just go right back to it.
Okay.
So the key thing, and this is, I just find it fascinating because there's definitely an evolutionary difference here between the two. Sharp-shinned on the left here versus Cooper's hawk literally has longer outer tail feathers versus the central feathers. So if you look at the feathers when they're stacked, because birds generally, let's say on average, have 10 tail feathers. Okay, and when they fold them together, they fold them so there's 2 rows or 2 stacks of feathers. We can see this here. And when you're on the back side, you're seeing the central tail feathers. And a lot of times the central tail feathers are more cryptic. On the back side, birds want to be more hidden, and the front side tends to have the pattern. But so this is the outer tail feather here, the Cooper's hawk. Cooper's hawks, literally, the outer tail feathers are shorter than the central. They keep on getting shorter. Whereas on the case of sharp-shinneds, the outer tail feather is longer. And I'm going to go to the flight photo because this really kind of helps. See, the feathers are starting to be fanned. The central tail feather, you can see the overlap here on these feathers. This is the outer tail feather when it's folded, but it's also the ones you see from the front view. And it's stacking on the next tail feather is going to be 5 here and then 5 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the center. So you can literally see them. This tail feather is longer than the central one, and this is a little bit longer than the central one, a little bit more longer, a little bit more longer, and then longest still. And who knows, maybe the Coopers and Sharp-shinneds are actually visually able to see this and help distinguish between them, because these are very similar birds and it might help them not mate with the wrong species. But again, here, central tail feather shorter, and you can kind of see the stair-stepping effect. So Sharp-shinned Coopers. So, okay. did that hopefully that explained it there, but it's really neat because you can actually go into some of these feather websites and look at the individual feathers. And some of my more extensive classes on the Raptors, I've pulled those off. I haven't pulled off the feathers. I have those slides pulled off from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and you can look and see those feather links. So, all right, I'm gonna switch to the next one. How social are turkey vultures? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, how social are turkey? Well, I would say highly social. You know, a lot of birds, of course, when they're breeding, they will have their own nest sites, and so these are not. They're social. I would say that turkey vulture is social away from the breeding season. There are birds that will breed more as a group. Let's say lark buntings, for example, you know, they could all be breeding in the same area, and there's different degrees of polygamy and that sort of stuff. Turkey vultures, not in that sense. However, in migration and even while they're out roosting and so forth, they could be together in very large groups. I mean, 30 plus at the same place time for the evening is that's a good average number, but I know some roosts that, you know, seem to have more like 100 or plus. So, and then in migration, of course, you can see them in large groups. But there are some advantages to being in a large number like this. Imagine you found a large carcass. More than one individual can take advantage of that. So that being together, sometimes that can help with that. I will mention it's fascinating too, because black vultures are extremely social. They tend to stay together in groups, and they use that tied in with their consuming, you could say, of the prey, because they follow turkey vultures around, and they use their larger numbers to help bump out the larger turkey vultures and get in to feed on carcasses that way. So, but why no mention of condors? Well, there's a lot of I apologize. I just they're in the chart that I showed, but beyond that, there's quite a few raptors I left off, and mostly because as long as I yacked it, I'm still a little bit over my talking time, and I just couldn't cover all the species, you know, in the time frame allowed. But I wanted to cover the ones that we did talk about well, and that was my goal. So I apologize for leaving out the condors, but also because they're just the probability of seeing them is lesser, and then also because they're like a doggone small plane flying out there, you probably would figure it out. You either confuse it with a Cessna or so. But again, I wish I could have covered all the species, but then I felt, it would have been quantity over quality. So, all right, well, let's see. Budios, one of the other comments in here is that Budios red tails themselves might have much larger and stronger looking bills than other bootios. And how good is that as a rule? I would say that, a red tail is a very big bootial. And of course, within the various bootios that are out there, the various species, smaller bootios will necessarily have smaller bills. And so let's say, and also depends upon the prey they feed upon. Being a generalist, I would say red tails do have a fair sized bill. If you compare the bill of a red tail versus a rough-legged, for example, rough-leggeds tend to eat smaller prey, and I would say their bill looks more petite. So, but I wouldn't put it in as compared to some of the other, a Swainson's hawk, for example. Yeah, maybe you can see it, but I think it'd be a difficult characteristic to judge in the field. I think it's probably a little bit bigger than Swainson's hawk, but they're close enough. And then a Ferruginous hawk, holy smokes! I mean, they've got a wide gape, but their bill is probably about the same size. So there is variation. A lot of it has to do with their diet, and red tails just are kind of larger overall. But I wouldn't. I would be cautious about just judging it based upon the size of their bill. So I think those are I don't see any other questions. I don't know if there's any other questions out there by chance.
None so far. Sorry, my cat just got in my way. None. Oh, here we go. So Jose says, thank you for the presentation. So I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. Valerie says, thank you. So we'll give it just another moment or two. And if anyone has any last minute questions, I can go ahead and type them in now. And then if not, we can just kind of go ahead and start to wind things down. I'll give it just a few more seconds here. Iris says, thank you very much.
Yeah, well, it's what a fun group of birds. I mean, it's a fantastic place if you're new to birding, this is a great place to start. You can learn a whole lot of skills studying raptors that will really carry over into all the other groups out there. And it can be tough. I can tell you, I remember when I first started bird watching, I got stung by a red tail, and you think that's a red tail, how could you get, but you get those different morphs and so forth. It's like, oh, what is this doggone bird? So.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so we're going to kind of go ahead and close down here. So thank you again, Homer, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight. We certainly appreciate it. I just want to throw out a really quick reminder. If you're not already, please follow Fresno Audubon on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm not quite as active on Twitter, but if you follow us on social media, that's a really great way to stay in the loop. And with different events, general meetings and field trips and the like. We also want to remind everyone that we have relaunched our YouTube channel. That's a great way to rewatch any general meeting presentations that you want to see again, or watch any that you missed for any reason. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. We do hope that you'll join us for next month's meeting, which is scheduled for December 13th. Robert Bruce, I apologize if I said the last name wrong, will be talking to us about wild turkey in the Sierra Nevada, so that should be pretty exciting. So stay tuned for an announcement and links to registration for that event. And yeah, thank you again, Homer, and thank you again, everyone who attended. So have a great remainder of your week and stay safe out there. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks for having me.